right? So first we have what's called passive filling. So passive filling means there's no contraction, isovolumic, right? Or I forgot what the word is for it, but there isn't any contraction at first. So like 70%, I think it's 70%, I don't quote on that, I believe 70% of the filling of the ventricle, of this ventricle right here, and this ventricle. So they fill at the same time, right? The 70% of that filling is actually passive. There's no contracting of the atrium, right? So a lot of times we think like, oh, the atrium contracts and that pushes blood into there. But the majority of filling of the ventricle is actually passive. So these valves, AV valves, are open, right? And so you go into diastole, you're pouring blood in, blood's coming in through here. The blood wants to come this way, so those valves are actually looking like this, right? Coming in this way from the atrium to the ventricle. Does that make sense? And so as this opens, it opens up less. Great, you have less pressure here. Pressure is still kind of high up here from blood building up. And then as this pressure decreases, it allows the blood just to kind of pour through that valve. It doesn't need the atrium to contract. Does that make sense? Because when we contract the atrium, by contracting the atrium, which is up here, and then the ventricle, which is down here, on that section of the heart, you have another section of the heart over here, right? So when we contract that atrium, what happens to the pressure here? A huge increase in pressure, right? But when we talk about passive filling, what we're saying is, well, like you said, isovolumic relaxation. So there's no blood coming in yet, so that means that this valve is still closed, right? Well, the thing is like when this ventricle starts to expand, this pressure is going to really decrease, right? Well, there's pressure in here because there's blood there. We have pressure. Eventually, when this decreases so much, it's kind of like pushes through that valve. Does that make sense? So the blood's going to start filling in. Now the valve's open, but there's still no contraction. So diastole is just referring to the relaxation, and just like when we say diastole, it means ventricular filling, like relaxation. That's what you can think of. And so like when you have that like passive filling, so you have like your atriums and then your ventricles. So it starts pouring through, the AV valves are open, and then what happens for the last part?
That's when the P wave hits, right?
And the P wave hits, what does the P wave represent?
Depolarization of the atrium.
Of the atrium, which is triggered by which pacemaker? The SA node is the beginning pacemaker of the heart. So the very first electrical impulse comes from the SA node. And it normally beats about 60 to 80 times a minute. And so what happens is when that thing fires, then it spreads across through these different fiber bunches, right? So the SA node fires and then the atriums contract. When the atriums contract, then we call that active filling, and that last 10 to 30% or however much it is of that blood gets shoved into the ventricle, right? And so when that happens, now let's talk about, so that the blood's coming there, and then do I have a lub yet? What has to happen in order to have a lub? We need to shove blood that way, right? We put all the blood in the ventricle, but we need to shove blood that way to kind of slap them shut. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's like someone needs to come this way to catch that and close those doors. And so how can we do that? Look, as soon as it contracts, then the ventricle is going to start shoving blood up in this direction, right? Because it kind of contracts in this kind of motion. So the heart kind of doesn't just go like this, it kind of just like this kind of thing. And so what happens is when it starts to squeeze up, all the blood's gonna go this way, like you said, and it's gonna slam those things shut, and we get the lub, right? Yeah. So what would happen if I got a lub? What does that mean? And so like when you hear like a sound, you could think of like something's turbulent. Like think about like when water's just flowing nice through something, it's pretty quiet normally. But as soon as like it hits something turbulent, it starts spinning around, it makes these noises. It's like starts making that noise, right? And so that's what's going on in your heart. Obviously, not a good thing, right? So like, what happens is like when you have a patient, you go and you listen to his heart, and you're listening to like the lub dub sound, right? That's what you should hear. But when you start hearing the sound, you're like, okay, blood's getting mixed up, right? And now based on where that sound is at, you can say, okay, is this systole or is this diastole? And which valve is it most likely, right? And so like if you heard a lub, then the dub, so that means the lub, what happened? Lub means I contracted what? The ventricle, right? The left and the right ventricles, right? They contract at the same time. And so a lot of times we think that like blood just goes and then but think about like the delay of blood to your body. That'd be weird, right? So it's actually like blood goes in here and here at the same time. Then blood goes down at the same time and leaves at the same time. And so what happens is that those ventricles contract and they slam close this valve and the semilunar pulmonary valves, right? Those are gonna, both the AV valves, I lied to you. So both the AV valves close when you get the lub sound, and so when that goes, we slam those, this goes through here, but that means I'm pushing blood back this way, right? So then that could mean there's a hole in the valve, or there could be a stenosis, which is like a hardening of the valves and they're not closing all the way. So if like my valves are shaped like this, well, a stenotic valve is like it's hardened, it's not gonna bend as well, and so maybe it's closing like this. Does that make sense? Now blood's gonna be kind of going like this. And that's where you get that really like that shh sound when you're listening to someone's heart. Or maybe there's just a hole in their valve, right? Or maybe their tendonae, chordae, tendonaes, whatever they're called. Those things aren't holding something right, or the papillary muscles aren't doing their job, right? And you're having these relapses of your valves. And when that happens, you get blood flowing back. We call that regurgitation. So like mitral regurgitation would be what? So mitral regurgitation is the left ventricle to the left atrium, right? Because the mitral valve is on the left side of the heart, between the AVs, right? If the whooshing noise is coming before the dub, I'm pretty sure that means that it's going back this way, because that's where the valves are closing. You haven't closed those. If you haven't heard a dub yet, that means you haven't closed those aortic or pulmonary valves yet, so you can't really have regurgitation there. Does that make sense? Or a murmur. So your systolic murmur is going to be more like when you have like that lub dub, because you're going, it's during systole, is when you're having that murmur. Does that make sense? And then the lub dub you're going into diastole, so it'd be more of a diastolic murmur. When the heart gets its oxygen, which comes from blood, so remember how the heart like...
And we're talking about the tissue itself.
Yeah, the actual heart muscle, because obviously your heart needs oxygen just like everything else, right? Like a heart attack is a lack of oxygen to the heart, really, a lack of blood flow. So if this is your heart, you have the aorta coming up like this. The very first things, you have these little holes right here in your aorta that break into these arteries, and they're going to come down. Those are called the coronary arteries, and then those go and feed the actual heart with blood. Obviously it needs blood, right? It's a muscle. So the thing is does it get its blood in diastole or systole? Diastole, right? Because think about it like, so it looks kind of more like this. It's literally kind of like at this angle. So that means that blood going this way, is that going to go right into there? No, right? So it kind of has to come up. Remember how it goes back down and slams against that? Get the dicrotic notch, closes the valves, we get a dub. And then as it comes down, it gets poured into those. Does that make sense? Yeah. Now that pressure's flowing into there. Now we're feeding our heart with oxygen. And if we're healthy, we're good to go.
So it came through while the ventricles were being relaxed, right? Exactly,
right? So during the isovolumic relaxation stage, we're going into diastole. So diastolic is when the heart gets fed with blood.